It's an incredible privilege to be here today for this important discussion on advancing inclusive growth and opportunity through fair chance business leadership. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aedan Macdonald, the founder and director of Justice Through Code, and a class of 2024 MBA candidate at Columbia Business School. Before we get started, I'd like to spend a few moments providing context for our topic and why it is important. Mass incarceration is a problem unique to our country. With only 5% of the world's population, the United States is home to 25% of the world's prison population. It is by any measure a massive problem, with nearly a quarter of our population, or 78 million people, having a criminal record. This problem is particularly relevant to our work at the business school, given the significant challenges that people with a history of incarceration face in securing employment. As a group, the formerly incarcerated experience 5 times the unemployment rate of the general population, with median earnings of less than $11,000 per year in the 3 years after release. This, like many other problems in our country, is one that disproportionately affects Black and brown communities, making it extremely difficult to progress towards closing the racial wealth gap. Black men in this country experience a 1 in 3 lifetime likelihood of incarceration, while white men experience a 1 in 17 likelihood. For Black and white women, that number rises to 1 in 18 and 1 in 111. We are here today to talk about solutions to this problem and the work of JPMorgan and their leadership in taking action to address the impact that the legal system involvement has on pathways to employment. As someone who spent 4 years incarcerated for my involvement in cannabis distribution in California in my early teens and 20s, this is a topic that's incredibly personally important to me. More than nearly any executive leader, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JPMorgan, champions the work of fair chance hiring at the firm and in the larger business community. Through their work on fair chance hiring, JPMorgan has had a tremendous impact, including the founding of the Second Chance Business Coalition. I'm excited for our guest, Nan Gibson, Executive Director of the firm's PolicyCenter, to tell you about the coalition. Please join me in thanking Nan for joining us today. So, Nan, I think JPMorgan has really served as a leader in this space. It's a very kind of unique work that's being done. And I'd love to hear more, if you could just tell a little bit more about kind of your work at JPMorgan and overall the firm around fair chance hiring.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aedan, and thank you, Dan, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for being here and your interest in this topic. You know, as you mentioned, Jamie Dimon has taken an interest in this issue, and really it sparked from a visit that he did in Chicago with some individuals who were formerly incarcerated, and it was a workforce development program with one of our community-based partners. And these were individuals who, as I said, they were formerly incarcerated, and they had gone through a workforce development program that prepared them for jobs to work in the Chicago Transit Authority. And they talked to Jamie about how the ability to have that training and to have these jobs with the Chicago Transit Authority that were, you know, good paying, good benefits with career pathways was really life-changing for them and transformative. And he came back from that visit with one of our grantees, and he said, we need to be more intentional about hiring people with criminal backgrounds. Now, I think, as you all probably know, the financial service industry is a very highly regulated industry. The primary regulatory framework that we have is through the FDIC that sets our hiring rules. And so one of the things that we had to do was really take a close look at how we were treating people with criminal backgrounds and their ability to join the firm. And really, we had to do a top-to-bottom review of that process so that we could look for opportunities to bring in more people off the sidelines and be part of our our workforce. So that's kind of the origin story of how we got started. And then from there, but we started with our own practices. What do we do as a firm? I'm happy to say, fast forward, last year, roughly 10% of our new hires were people with criminal backgrounds, or about 4,300 people. So if you think about that, in an industry like ours, if we're able to hire folks with criminal backgrounds, that has no bearing on the job that they're doing, whatever was in their past, there are opportunities for many other companies, large and small, to be able to look at their own hiring practices and think about how they can, open up their talent pipelines for people who are trying to move on from their records. You talked about mass incarceration. Obviously we're a firm that is not hiring people right out of prison because of our regulatory framework. However, the reason that we, knew that we wanted to create a coalition of businesses, large companies, is because we know that there are other businesses with different regulatory frameworks that can hire people right out of prison. And so that's why, we thought it was important to create a business coalition. And I don't know if, we started with about 30 companies when we launched. We're up to about 44 companies across industries that are, dedicated to either creating a second chance hiring program within their firm or advancing or enhancing the programs that they have. We share best practices. We work on a whole host of issues together as a group to try to make it possible for more people, as I said, to move beyond their records. So that's kind of the broad brush, and we basically also take a holistic view. So there's what we do as an employer, there are the investments that we make in the community organizations that we work with. We developed a community hiring model, which we can get into as well, where we work with nonprofit organizations and legal services organizations in the communities where we're doing the hiring. There's the private sector leadership piece that I mentioned to you about the Second Chance Business Coalition. And then there's my day job, which is the public policy work that we do, because business has an important role to play here, but without better public policy, we can't achieve systemic change. So that's sort of the holistic view of how we approach this issue.
Yeah, I think all of this is so interesting to me, and I think it's interesting, especially because in this line of work, I often tell people about JPMorgan's leadership, and it is kind of being a financial services firm, not the most intuitive connection, right? And so really appreciate the work. I'd love to hear a little bit more kind of about the work on the Second Chance Business Coalition, how this was formed, kind of what was the reasoning behind bringing together this group of very diverse companies that, as you mentioned, can provide employment all the way from people who have recently returned home from prison to professional careers like at JPMorgan.
Sure. Well, we knew that we could make an impact in our own business, but we recognized that that wasn't enough, frankly. And that's why we thought it was important to partner with other companies. And we have experience working in other, business coalitions that are very much based in developing best practices and advancement strategies for other types of populations where there is some type of, labor market issue. And so, a great example of that, I think, is, obviously a very different type of population, but the veteran population. So you might find it hard to believe today, but 10 years ago, when we were one of the companies that founded the Veteran Jobs Mission, the unemployment rate for veterans was higher than the national average. And so, fast forward 10 years, and now it's lower than the national average, or roughly the national average, depending. But that just tells you, that the private sector had a role to play, and that there were practical things that the private sector could do to help veterans transition into the labor force. Looking at resumes, how do you translate military service into private sector service? What are the focusing more on skill sets as opposed to degrees? So, when you see an issue like that where, there is a role for public policy, but there's also a role for business to play in, breaking down some of those barriers. And so you see how successful, that an intervention, a business sector intervention like that was. And we said, this is another example of a particular population where the business sector needs to come together, look at their own practices, look at the way, look at their internal hiring strategies, look at everything from how you do background checks to internal culture. What is your corporate leadership? How supportive are they of these issues? And that, sharing of information and knowledge has been, really a tremendous way for other companies to learn and enhance their own programs. So, I hope it doesn't take 10 years, but I think we're already starting to see some of the, opportunities. We see it in our own firm. As I mentioned, 4,300 people last year with some type of criminal background. In the 3+ years that we've been talking about second chance hiring publicly and sending that, demand signal, sending that value signal, we've seen it in our own hiring where the types of people who are attracted or who have opened their minds to, oh, well, maybe I could have a career in financial services, even though I might have something, in my background. So we're, anecdotally, I'm told by our HR folks that, we are seeing folks apply for jobs at much higher levels. So we hire, people with backgrounds whose backgrounds fit within our regulatory framework. Just, I want to keep reiterating that. We are seeing, we hire across all of our lines of business and at most levels. So we're seeing it in our own hiring. And again, the power of 44 companies, I don't, at some point, these in the Second Chance Business Coalition, these are companies that are, many of them are household names. Many of them are in virtually every community across the country. And sending that, again, that demand signal, like they're willing to put their logos up on a website that says, we're working on this problem. Now, the companies are at varying stages. Not everybody is as far along in the process as we are. And it is a process. I mean, it didn't happen overnight for us either. So, but the commitment to working on it is real. We have monthly meetings where we, focus on specific issues. Whether it's, like, as I said, background checks or corporate culture or those types of issues that companies are really trying to figure out how to do it better. And so that sharing information and best practices is really, showing up, I think, in the work that we and other companies are doing.
Yeah, really appreciate that. I think one of the things that's very unique in what you're sharing is that, you have a CEO, right, who has come in and been very supportive of an issue. And this is actually translated to kind of an impact on the ground, right, with 10% of your workforce having a prior justice system involvement. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of how the firm's more holistic approach has allowed that to happen, right? Because I think sometimes there can be a disconnect between what the CEO is saying and what frontline hiring managers are doing. And being at a business school, we want to be very tactical, right? How do we actually do this? So we'd love to love to hear a little bit more about.
Absolutely. Well, it is, I always say it's nice to be able to, I feel very comfortable coming out and talking at a forum like this because I know that my boss, is out there talking about it regularly and, feels very passionate about this issue. So it's great to have a CEO, but you're right. You do need the commitment at very high levels in companies to be able for this to be very effective. And that's why, as part of the Second Chance Business Coalition, it requires, we require either, the chief HR officer or the chief DE&I officer to basically sign a commitment that they are going to do this. So these are commitments that these companies have made at a very high level. That's sort of your point number one. I think the other issue that is really important, especially because and why we are delighted to be talking to a business school audience. We often get invited to talk to law school audiences, but because there's a business case for second chance hiring. We've seen it in our own hiring. Workers there's much lower turnover. They are, committed to the work that they do. They're enthusiastic about the work that they do. And the other piece that I would say is that, there's also national data that shows that. The Society for Human Resource Management also has studies of, many other companies that show that these are, workers who are looking to take advantage of the opportunity to succeed and to create greater economic opportunity for themselves and their families. So there's definitely a business case there as well. And we see it with our the other business leaders throughout the firm, including in the space of public policy, which we also work on because you could, candidly, we weren't really sure how our customers were going to react, how our employees were going to react, to our work on Second Chance. And it has been, overwhelmingly positive from our employers, from our clients, our customers, who see this as, creating greater value in the communities that we're serving. So I think that, I think that answers I think we covered the question there, but that's, and I think by virtue of the fact that you see that the coalition of companies continues to grow. We started with just under 30, we've now, we'll probably have, we're at about 44 companies at the moment. And we spend a lot of our time talking to companies that are interested in doing this, explaining to them how we do it, and encouraging them to, do what they can, given their either regulatory framework or also their, their business model, to work it into their business model.
Yeah, I think what's really unique, as we've talked a little bit about, is kind of how JPMorgan has looked at this work in terms of sort of like pillars, right? And when you look at other companies that have engaged in this topic, it's been kind of more of a hot topic over the last couple of years. Generally, it's through maybe an internal hiring program, or maybe they have a social impact team that's funding local organizations. And I think that JPMorgan has been really unique in that very holistic view. So I'm wondering if you could talk like tactically, how do these different parts fit together, the policy, internal hiring, all of the different parts of the work?
Right. So I've covered here's how we do it. So there's, what do we do as a firm? What are our own hiring practice? That's sort of pillar number one. The second piece is our philanthropic investments in these community organizations and legal services organizations. As I mentioned, we developed a community hiring model so that we work with local workforce development organizations and legal services organizations to help get people ready for our pipeline. because even though, we banned the box a number of years ago, but we recognized that it wasn't enough. We don't do a conditional offer of employment, we don't do a criminal background check until a conditional offer of employment has been made. Well, that could result in a less than, ideal, experience for both on the candidate side and also on the hiring manager side. If you get to that point and then you find out there might be something FDIC preclusive in your background. So in order to, demystify the process of, what someone might, what may or may not be in or out of scope for the FDIC, we have educated our workforce development partners on, what's in scope and what someone might have to apply for a waiver for. The workforce development folks sends them to the legal services organization to determine whether or not that whatever is in their past could potentially be eligible for an expungement or a sealing, which would allow that. The FDIC says if a record has been expunged or sealed, then financial organizations can set that aside, assuming it doesn't have any bearing on the job that they would be doing. And so, that's the community, based piece through our philanthropic work and, working also with the business. The third piece I mentioned is the Second Chance Business Coalition, is that broader, working with other businesses to send that demand signal. And then the fourth piece, again, is my day job, the PolicyCenter, where we work on the public policy changes, and we focused in on, a handful, really focused very specifically on a handful of issues to lower barriers to employment for people with records. And so, probably the best example of what we work on is clean slate legislation or record expungement, automatic record expungement. And when you have a situation where in this country, 78 million people, or 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record, that just leaves way too many people on the sidelines. And so, we have focused, I think roughly 8 states now have passed legislation to automatically expunge records once they're eligible. So once a state determines, what are the conditions under which a person's record could be sealed or expunged, our view is that process should just happen automatically. And as I said, 8 states now have passed this legislation. There's also legislation pending in Congress for federal crimes as well. And, we've worked on a number of these bills, including in New York State. We've worked on the New York Clean Slate Bill 2 sessions in a row, and we're really hoping to get it across the finish line in the upcoming legislative session. And we hope you all will come out and support us and help us get that across the finish line. So we're gearing up for that. But that's sort of an example. We also supported the Pell restoration, so restoring Pell grants for people who are incarcerated. We support legislation to, the Free to Drive or Driving for Opportunity Act, which basically would end the practice of suspending people's driver's licenses for non-driving fines and fees, or offense, fines and fees resulting from other offenses or whatnot. Trying to think. We always start with we always start with fixing our own house, and so we have focused on fair hiring and banking. There is a bill that already passed the House of Representatives, the Fair Hiring and Banking Act, and a piece of legislation was just introduced a few weeks ago in the Senate by Senator Manchin. So that preserves the optionality of hopefully getting it into some type of end-of-the-year package. But there, we have worked very closely with the FDIC to modify some of the rules under which people can be hired in the financial services industry. They've made some of the changes that we've, suggested, and they felt like they went about as far as they could, and now they feel like Congress needs to do more, so that's why we've worked on that legislation. So that's sort of the holistic approach that we've been taking to this issue.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think one of the really kind of other unique things about the work that you're doing is JPMorgan, obviously a professional services company, not, as I said, the first company that you would think of in terms of engaging in fair chance hiring. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of what some of those challenges have been and kind of the hiring process and how your work in the PolicyCenter has helped inform or kind of further the work at the firm.
Yeah, so I would say, one of the, again, just what I referenced earlier is getting people ready for our pipeline or demystifying the process of, what it's like to go through. I mean, before I came to JPMorgan Chase, I worked at the White House. And I will say that the hiring process for the financial services industry is not that different from trying to get hired at the White House. So, these are, so it can be a challenge for, folks to go through that process. And that's why, as I said, we work very closely with community organizations and legal services nonprofits. One of the interesting, I'll go back to one of the reasons that, it's important to talk about this both internally, and also publicly, is that's how we can spark innovation. And so one of my colleagues in our pro bono legal team at JPMorgan Chase, we hire a lot of lawyers, and we have a big pro bono legal team, which is fantastic. And they do lots of expungement clinics, like all across the country, but other people's expungement clinics, right? And so one of the lawyers in our pro bono team, he called me up and he was like, so we have these community branches now. Do you think we could hold expungement clinics in our own branches? And I was like, what a great idea. Let's figure it out. And so we piloted expungement clinics in Chicago, so on the south side of Chicago. And it was a really, it was a small pilot, but it was a partnership between our legal services partner in the community, a law firm and their pro bono team, and then our pro bono lawyers and then our community branch staff. And, I wasn't there personally, but the branch manager said that, people left the branch clutching their paperwork that they were going to file to get their expungement. And they were sobbing because they were just so happy to be able to move on from that past, right? And, one of the reasons why we thought it was so important to, do this type of work, is to help people in the community. But let's face it, there's 78 million people with criminal records. There's not enough lawyers at JPMorgan Chase or probably anywhere to clear all these records. Which is why you need automatic, record expungement. And so, it's doing that. It's basically saying listen, we've had our pro bono lawyers go out there, but we can only serve 20 people at a time. And there are 78 million people out there who need help. So you do the math. It's going to take a long time, if ever. Somebody actually did do the math, and I can't remember how long it was, but it was a long time. But we've seen in places like Pennsylvania, they've already cleared 1.5 million records for people in that state through their clean slate legislation. In Utah, they've already cleared 500,000 records for people in that state. And one of the other important things is to mention is this is a very bipartisan issue. It's become a very bipartisan issue. And you can, as evidenced by the fact that we've seen both, red states and blue states pass this type of legislation. So, that's sort of an example of how we, are also, putting, using, using the policy, we're promoting policy, but also using the resources that we have at the business to demonstrate why the policy is necessary. Because like I said, like we have a lot of lawyers, but we still don't have enough to clear all the records that are out there that are eligible to be cleared.
Definitely. I think given the kind of how embedded you are in this work and JPMorgan's leadership, and then we have many business school students here, I'd love to hear kind of your advice for people that are interested in kind of enacting fair chance hiring in their organizations or kind of working more on these issues.
Sure. One of the other aspects of the Second Chance Business Coalition is that we're creating, we've created some tools and we'll continue to create more tools for people to be able to, companies to be able to leverage. One of the tools that we created is an on-ramps guide, and you can go to, I think, if you just Google Second Chance Business Coalition, it will all come up and the resources and the tools will be there. I always mess up the URL, I should know it by now. But one of the tools and resources that we have up there is an on-ramps guide. And what we wanted to do was demonstrate to companies, there are, and basically it's a menu of options of ways that you can, either start or improve your second chance hiring program. And again, it's everything from, background checks or corporate culture or, leadership or, some of your HR practices. So those, resources are available. They're open source. Anybody can use them, and we hope people do. And the other tool that we've created is a community partner map. And we've mapped sort of the top 45, metropolitan or areas, MSAs, and hiring places where obviously where the most hiring goes on in the country. And so we've mapped those to community organizations that businesses and legal services organizations that businesses can, reach out to if they're looking for partnerships in the community to help source their talent pipeline. And, the resources are there so that businesses don't have to be like, okay, well, where do we start and what do we do? I mean, those resources are there so that, they can at least, find a starting point if they're not already doing it within their firm. So those are a couple of the suggestions that we have there. I mean, again, there are resources out there, but I go back to it requires a commitment and being very intentional about it, because many companies that we've worked with in the coalition have discovered, like, oh, we actually do hire a fair amount of people with criminal backgrounds, but they're not doing it in a way that is that is intentional.
Thank you. I'd love to turn it over to Q&A if anybody has any questions. I know we'll have a mic coming down here.
Yeah, I would love to know as you're doing this, it sounds like there's a lot going on in terms of hiring. How do you ensure that there's some sort of transparency when it comes to like pay rates so you don't run into job exploitation?
So most of these, I'll tell you about it from the JPMorgan Chase perspective. We preserve the privacy of the individuals who apply for the jobs. And so the only people who know that someone has a criminal background is a small team of dedicated folks who do the security screenings. So the hiring manager doesn't even know if someone has a criminal background. And part of that obviously is to destigmatize the process. And what's interesting about that, I'll get to your pay point in a minute, but so in our case, no one knows that they have a criminal background. So they're subject to all of the, just our regular pay scale and compensation, program as part of just like anybody else. There's no difference in terms of what their, what might happen to them in terms of that. So we think it's, important to preserve people's privacy. It's interesting, but we know, however, that other companies treat it differently. So, for example, they do talk very openly about which employees and who the employees are and things like that. So I can't say how it works in those other companies. I can tell you how it works at our company. The other point that I would just make about why we feel it's important to preserve people's privacy is that the stigma is real and it's still strong, even in a company that, like ours, that is very forward-leaning about wanting to make sure that, as part of our inclusive hiring strategy, we're including people with criminal records. We have asked people to self-identify. We have lots of business resource groups in the company. A company is like as big as ours, like you name it, we've got a business resource group for it. And to date, there's literally only been one employee, in all the 3 years that we've been talking about this publicly and openly, who has been willing to self-identify. So that sort of tells you how strong the stigma, that it's real and that it exists and that it persists. And that's something that we're, very mindful of, but we also do think it's important to preserve their privacy. So it's, as I said, there's only a small group of people who knows, and, but chances are, in this room, you're sitting next to, people who do.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lauren Decker. I'm an alum of the program, the MBA program. Thank you both for the work you're doing to create hope and opportunity for the formerly incarcerated. I really enjoyed your analogy to the veteran population. And I think for me, the moral of the story is really tapping into that wealth of talent that would otherwise be untapped.
Right.
And I'm just curious what you've learned about extrapolating that into other settings. So for example, I'm almost 15 years out since my MBA, so I've seen how careers transpire over time. And I also run a women's focused co-working space where women have had career gaps in their resume. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, on-ramping everything you've just described, a lot of it comes down to confidence, how you've extrapolated what you've learned for this population, for other populations, and specifically women in that situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is going to probably make me unpopular, but we actually have a program for women reentering the labor force as well, which is a terrific program. And there's actually somebody on our team who joined as part of that program. It's called the Reentry Program. And I said to HR, I'm like, you might want to rethink that title because of the work that we're doing, because it has actually created confusion around second chance. But you're absolutely right. This is about, thinking through what are the specific, barriers that, different, types of workers might face in terms of either joining or rejoining the labor force. And one of the things that we do in the second chance space, I should mention, one of the in terms of the workforce development groups that we work with, they know who has a criminal background, but we don't. You see what I'm saying? So when so they're the ones who are helping guide the folks, to make it successfully through our talent pipeline and, getting them ready for that pipeline, whether it's coaching, whether it's, resume building, whatever that is to help them through. And oftentimes again, as I said, it hadn't occurred to someone. They thought like, oh, I might not ever get a job. I mean, why would I? It had never occurred to them to apply for a job at JPMorgan Chase, right? They're thinking about like other industries where they're thinking like the entry might be easier, a lower barrier, like maybe retail, maybe, dining or something like that. And when the workforce development partners that we work with say, oh, but you could apply for Chase and they have competitive wages, great benefits, and a career pathway, which is the most important piece of the companies, like ours, is that, once folks make it through that initial hurdle, then, there are lots of opportunities for advancement within the firm. So, we do think about it, for specific, populations and how they might be having, a difficult time either, entering or re-entering the labor force. And, let's face it, I mean, you guys all know, I mean, the battle for talent is real. And so companies, writ large, not just ours, are looking at lots of different, ways of trying to fill their talent pipelines and trying to bring people on. Hope that answered your question.
I might just add one thing as well from our kind of community lens. At Just Through Code, we run a program where we teach basically people to become software engineers that have been impacted by incarceration. We teach professional skills. We bring them in contact with MBA students as advisors and professional mentors. I think this confidence that you speak about, right? It's really about having these community organizations that can do this work, that allow people into spaces like Columbia, that have attachment to companies like JPMorgan that really have this incredible signaling power, right? It's like, what does that mean? You think of the first time you get into CBS, you walk into campus, it's like that feeling, right? And to be able to extend that feeling to a larger number of people, I think that's really when we're looking at how do we change this? How do we support people re-entering the workforce, whether or not it be women or formerly incarcerated individuals or military veterans? It's really about that, right? It's about the direct support and people like everybody here kind of taking the time to work with those populations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, because even when they join the firm, then the mentorship, has to continue. I'm thinking of the individual on our team who, recently rejoined the labor force, and the mentorship is really important because it helps build that confidence. Like, again, we don't know who on the team has a criminal background, so it's a little bit different, but we have, again, like all the supports imaginable for, a workforce are available to folks at JPMorgan, at a company like JPMorgan Chase, whether it's, emergency childcare or substance abuse or mental health or, there's a whole host of, benefits that are available to people if they have, specific, needs or some type of, wraparound services that they may still require once they've joined the labor force or our labor force. You've been very patient.
So now we're actually up
Oh.
on time. So
He's got one last question.
Just really quick, thank you so much for joining us today. Earlier, you mentioned that to create such an initiative like this one, you really need the buy-in from senior stakeholders within the company and advocates for this. I'm a bit curious, as a public policy student myself, how did you go about gaining that buy-in, even from people that perhaps had different views or that disagreed initially with that statement? I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Well, actually, it wasn't that hard. I mean, in the sense that, because as I said, when 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record, everybody knows somebody who has something in their past that they need to move on from. That doesn't make them they'll still be a good employee. They're still, taking care of their families. I mean, these are economic costs that are not only borne, as you know, by like the individual and their families, but community, society. So I think, people get it. I'll just give a quick example because I know we're up on time, but, when we were, sometimes public policy is actually a little bit more, trying to figure out where we're going to show up on a particular issue can, it's something that we just have to work through. And in the clean slate space, we were talking to a market leader because we were going to go work on a clean slate campaign in their state. And we were explaining how it works and like trying to get his buy-in. And he sat back and he goes, well, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Are you saying that automatic record keeping, you're just taking like paper records and turning them into electronic records? And I go, well, I guess in its simplest form, yeah, that is what it is. He goes, oh, we do that every day. We can be for that. And I was like, great. So it just sort of depends on the orientation of the person, and if you can find the thing that they can relate to and that helps them support it, like on an issue like that, that's how we got there. But I will say, I mean, I think at our firm anyway, people have been very, largely, very supportive and, wanting to do more. We have business leaders who want those community hiring models in the markets that they're leading. So, that also reinforces the business case for the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Nan.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry
you.
to run over.
No, thank you so much, Nan. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today and
Yes.
to hear everything. So definitely appreciate it.